It's Monday, and uh, so far I might have had some cheese popcorn for breakfast, and it didn't. It's not. I'm not okay. It was a mistake. I shouldn't. I should not do that. It's youthful folly. Let's see here.
It's
Gonna go
like
ahead and
this sounded like
unpause
a
the
good
recording.
idea, but
It didn't really. I didn't really process the idea. It was very. It was much more of a kind of just physical impulse.
like
Uh,
Elroy Jetson when he wanted that giant ice cream sundae for breakfast and then immediately regretted it.
I think it all comes back to the Jetsons or the Flintstones, really.
Right?
Uh, no, I was taking my kid to school, and we had done on the weekends. We kind of wander around small town Wyoming, getting snacks basically. And so I had this maybe a third of a bag of cheese popcorn left, and I was, I was tired, I was hungry, I was kind of cranky, I hadn't had coffee, and I just went for it. I grabbed it. I'm ashamed, really. Uh,
Well, I'm sorry you regret it.
so this is your Solidarity House morning live stream feed. Back again. We were gone for a while. Now we're back. Lots of weird stuff happening here as well. The weather is not so good, and but on the good side, which you can see on our Facebook page as well as our Twitter page, you can see the bus that arrived yesterday. We have some folks moving in who are also turning this huge ass bus into a house over time, and we're going to be bringing that to you. We're going to be segmenting that on the podcast of the step-by-step turning the bus into the house process. It's very exciting. Antifa is actually going to be working in close quarters with watching that project happen. And we're really looking forward to bringing you that, because we do have a commie home improvement component of the show. We're all about this old commune, as it's called, and so we're looking forward to that and many other projects here. But right now we've got Briana Rose Lee back with us. The last time you were here, you were talking to us about some local and national Line 3 pipeline activism. Before we go into the Minneapolis stuff, how is that Line 3 stuff going?
I mean, it's kind of at the same spot it was. Unfortunately, it has been proceeding. We are still doing protests against it. Some of the environmental studies they're still tied up in the courts, but one has come back, actually, proving what we knew, that it was detrimental. But there hasn't been any good news anyway about them stopping it. But we are continuing the protests, and hopefully that goes somewhere. I'm really honestly just counting on President Biden to step in on this one. And I hope that we can make enough noise nationally about it. Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate, but it actually does tie into what we're talking about today with police brutality.
It absolutely does, and I know that it does, and I know that that has been the case with pipeline protests since time immemorial. The cops just love brutalizing pipeline protesters.
They do. And as a component of racism that I don't think gets spoken about enough, the activists that you end up seeing getting arrested are generally the white activists and the white celebrity activists that get, arrested famously at a protest, which, don't get me wrong, is important. And we need them to do that for visibility. But
Yeah,
we
yeah.
don't see all the native protesters that are up there. And even in the movements that we've seen lately, there's a lot of attention on police brutality in the cities, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening at these pipeline protests. And I don't understand why exactly that never gets shown in media. They'll just say a protest is going on, maybe. And all I can think it has to do with money, because the news corporations, of course, are going to be owned by a lot of the same people that have the money in the pipelines. And so maybe it's conflicts of interest that prevents them from sharing these stories. Maybe it's just racist. Maybe they're just bad journalists. I don't know, but it doesn't
Well,
get the attention it should.
Well, we want to take a deeper dive into that soon too. And I also am acknowledging the kind of sick to my stomach feeling that I had when you uttered the phrase, "We're just counting on President Biden at this point to help to, to do what he is supposed to do on it." I mean, I get that we've been able to extract some concessions from this administration, but hearing that phrase is sort of reminds me of the feeling that you get when you're driving really close to the edge of a cliff and there's not a whole lot of like barricade or protection there, or when you see videos of folks driving these mountainous cliffs and you just get that kind of nauseated feeling in the pit of your stomach.
Yeah.
That's what I was hearing there. So I do hope for the best for that movement and that it be pushed forward as much as possible.
Same. And it is hard to say like President Biden is our hope here because, I mean, while he has been better on the environmental things, we know he's not exactly an environmental president. I mean, Greenpeace initially didn't give him a great mark when they were first marking these primary candidates. So
we just push as much as possible.
Yep.
My mom always used to say when it comes to hope, you hold one hand up in the air with hope and you hold one hand under your rear end and you see which one fills up first. And
Exactly.
that's pretty much how I feel about if you're waiting for Joe Biden to ride in maybe Don Quixote on a Bronca, on a burro or something, but you're not going to get a knight in armor or anything out of
something about Joe Biden on a horse.
Unfortunately, our governor also is not going to do it. So, and unfortunately, he's a Democratic governor, which means he'll be running again. So unless there is someone really great who primary challenges him, we're unfortunately going to be stuck with that, or the My Pillow guy who seems to keep toying with wanting to run for governor of my state. So yeah, it's bad. Honestly, I have nothing good to report on line 3 right now, other than we're still fighting.
I would be missing Jesse Ventura if My Pillow guy got elected governor.
That is a post-apocalyptic electoral hellscape I can't even contemplate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right? Like, that's my options. And the current governor is filled with problems, as we will get into a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, with the My Pillow guy possibly running, it is pretty terrifying.
There's always a legitimate shot that Eric Prince will become governor of Wyoming at some point or another. He throws millions of dollars into other candidates and other political races here. I think that he has, some kind of secret pad in Jackson or something like that. And so, man, state politics, that's all I can say. But we wanted you to come on and actually talk about some pretty serious stuff and really some POV, some on the ground perspectives on what's been going on in Minneapolis. As everyone knows, the whole country has been watching Minneapolis. We have watched, since the murder of George Floyd. We have watched the demonstrations, the epicenter of demonstrations that followed there in Minneapolis. We followed, obviously, the Chauvin trial. We followed the military occupation of the city in anticipation of protests. We've been watching, and it really, in so many ways has become a center of not just sensationalist politics, but also grassroots politics and mutual aid and all kinds of cool stuff too. And so we wanted to bring you on to talk a little bit about that. I hope you don't mind.
No, I'm happy to talk about this. And I'm really glad that you said militarized police, because that's exactly what it is. We are living under military occupation. It is not okay. This is completely unconstitutional. So let's take a deep breath. So Minnesota abolished the death penalty in 1911. And I'm going to start by saying that because I think it's extremely important that we speak about the fact that our state does not allow state-sanctioned murder. It is supposed to be illegal. So going with that premise, why are cops allowed to murder? So cops are allowed to kill people in the line of duty and while they're at work. without giving the person a trial. However, people who have gone to trial and have been actually found guilty of heinous crimes are not given the death penalty, which I agree with. I'm completely against the death penalty. I want it abolished nationally. But why are cops still allowed to kill if Minnesota abolished the death penalty? So I'm just going to leave that statement out there, because obviously I know most of the viewers are probably going to agree with that, and there's nothing we can really do about it here, but I think it's important to bring that up. As far as what's been going on in Minnesota, and we are kind of at the epicenter of a lot of grassroots activation, it isn't really a huge surprise. Minnesota actually has the highest turnout for voters in the country. And this has been several years running. So we're very proud of this. And even as recently as like a week ago, when they determined the new districting, we actually held on to all 8 of our seats when we expected to lose one with this new census. And it's because of our incredible census turnout. We had #1 census turnout in the country, percentage wise. And because of that, New York actually lost a seat and we held on to ours. It's not like we like took it from New York or anything, but just the way the numbers lined up. And I say that because we know how active New York is. So I think people are starting to realize that Minnesota is an extremely civically engaged state. And so it isn't a surprise to me at all that Minnesota would be starting this. And I want to quote Prince real quick, because he was all like, no one thought the revolution would start in Minneapolis except for Prince. Prince knew, and he knew how engaged our citizens are, and he knows how much we care about each other. And that's something that's been a huge, huge part of our uprisings in the last year. Our community, it's incredible. Like the mutual aid, people have really come to each other's defense. I mean, churches, church groups, just random people will just, put up a PayPal on their Facebook page and be like, hey, I'm going to collect supplies. I'm looking for the following, drop them off at my house or send me some money and I'll go pick it up and make a drop. And people were doing this all summer. And I'm really happy to see it didn't stop. It's definitely gone down from where it was last summer, but it hasn't stopped. And we are continuing to help each other. And now with the recent murder of Dante Wright, it has kind of ramped back up, and Brooklyn Center really needed a lot of help, and immediately people mobilized, and it was like we already had these structures in place and the groups, people already knew where to go. I'm really proud of my city, but we shouldn't have to do this.
Of course. Sure.
I just want to say that Prince is one of my favorite artists, and I feel akin to Minneapolis and what you're going through. And as we're fighting this battle, I believe one of the lyrics from one of his songs was "Let's Go," which is, of course, in a number of songs. But when Prince sang it, it was much more effective for me. And can I just point out real quick that his Super Bowl halftime show is probably one of the most awesome performances I have ever seen in the rain. That man could move. And anyway, I digress. But yes, thank you for bringing Prince up. I love the man and I miss him.
You did bring up Prince, to be fair, but I want to. But what I was thinking about in terms of that love was, to me, that was apparent when George Floyd was being murdered, when Derek Chauvin was murdering George Floyd, because and the fact that the defense tried to use this as some kind of mitigating, factor. The fact that they're all surrounded by people begging them to stop doing what they're doing. That people are outraged at what they're seeing. They know that if they actually tried to stop it, they could potentially get killed themselves, but they are doing everything they can, and they're shouting and they're saying, what are you doing? I can't believe this. And I'm just, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about, obviously, the fact that none of, had it not been filmed, had there not been just a line of witnesses, and everyone is outraged by this. And to me, that's love too. That's community love too. That is this, there was really an offensive on the part of the community to do something about it as it was happening. And is it that kind of spirit that inspired that outrage and all of that energy? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
It is. I mean, and you're exactly right. It didn't just start when George Floyd was murdered. This began way before that. Our community is close. It is tight knit. And that is something that I think is different. Like I grew up on the East Coast and now I live in the Midwest. And it is a noticeable change. Like you talk to your neighbors more here. It's not so much like the barely make eye contact with people. People really do stop and say hi to you. And the small talk and like, you know, our car gets stuck in the snow and someone random stranger will jump out with a shovel and help shovel you out because we're all in it together. And there is that sense of community in Minnesota and specifically Minneapolis. And so when George Floyd was being murdered, it isn't surprising to me that there was a group of people holding the cops trying to hold the cops accountable right then and there. I mean, and you heard them all yelling, you heard them speaking, and especially the firefighter who's like, let me help. I know how to help. Let me help. And they wouldn't let her. You hear the older man, his testimony honestly made me break down. I was one of the crazy people who watched the entire trial. I had a lot of friends who didn't want to watch it at all, which I think is very valid. I must be a sadist or something, but I
believe the correct term is masochist.
Masochist. I was like, wait, that's the wrong word.
That's a different episode.
That's a different one.
We'll have a different episode on that.
But I watched the whole thing because I wanted to make sure I saw every word of it. I wanted to know exactly what happened, what was said in that trial, and what the defense was going to try to pull. And I didn't want to hear it from anyone but that person. And what I ended up really finding was the older man's testimony is the one that really broke me because you could hear him just like really trying to speak to George. He was ignoring the cops and he was just focused on trying to get George to just calm down. And it broke my heart. And I'm honestly going to cry talking about it because like he was the one that I really think helped the prosecutor because you could just tell that man had been there from the start of the crime to the end. And even after he watched the cops murder George Floyd, he still spoke to the cop and was like, you know, I know all of you aren't bad. And he was really trying to like be a voice of reason. And it just, I don't know. I don't feel like any justice will ever actually be served. I'm happy Chauvin was convicted on all 3 charges. It was obviously the correct call. I was really nervous about a hung jury. And I feel like a lot of people around the country weren't nervous about that. But Minnesota has never prosecuted a white cop for murder before. We had only prosecuted 1 cop for murder ever in our history. It was a black cop who murdered a white woman years ago.
And I remember that. And that was absolutely a bad thing.
Which was horrible. And he deserved to be convicted.
But everyone, you know, kind of in the know about that or really savvy about it kind of noted the irony of that. And so this is an interesting transition. And I certainly was surprised by the verdict. I also thought it would be a hung jury. But I wanted to back up too to what you're talking about when you're talking about the friendliness of Minneapolis, and I've certainly been there many times and seen that, and I've got really dear friends, you know, who live there, and I love going to the Twin Cities for that very reason. It's a warm and wonderful place, and at the same time, you have some of the worst cops ever, and you've got and particularly your police union is just an evil Nazi organization. I mean, they're fucking fascists. They're open racists. They have the head of the police union has the racist insignia that he wears, and so my question is, how did your uprising and how did your organizing and how did the voice of the people push back against that cop hegemony, that very brutal cop hegemony that has characterized Minneapolis?
I mean, I'd like to say that I feel like it's made some changes, but honestly, when Daunte Wright was murdered, the very next day, the cops flew a blue line flag. So that right there in a nutshell kind of tells you that the cops really, they've learned nothing. They don't see what they did as a problem. Many of them support Derek Chauvin. Many of them think it was the wrong conviction. They think this just happened. And this is, you know, perpetuated in right-wing media as well. But cops all around the country seem to be outraged that someone was actually held accountable for murder. Like it boggles my mind because I guess I'm not a terrible person, but like, I don't understand how if you consider yourself a good cop, shouldn't you hate bad cops more than we do? shouldn't you want all the bad cops gone so you don't have that reputation, and your reputation actually becomes to protect and serve?
That's the seeming logic. But you know what? I have maybe there have been one or two instances that have been highly hyped by the media where active duty cops have either done something to prevent brutality or have come out and said things. Like, there might be a couple of exceptional cases. I personally have, and I've brought it up. I brought it up when I was, involved in criminal defense at the Wyoming Defender Aid Clinic. I brought it up just talking to even ex-cops, as well as active duty cops. I've tried to find this. I've never found a cop, even a supposed good cop, who won't at least qualify or caveat their criticism of bad police. They will at least say something like, well, I can certainly understand the pressure that they're under. I wouldn't do it that way, which is sort of soft liberal bullshit that has nothing to do, well, it's
why they're saying what she did was an accident.
Yeah.
And it was an accidental police killing for Daunte Wright. That was not an accident. A woman with 26 years of cop experience on the force, who's actually a trainer and the police union president in her city. And she's married to a cop who, get this, her husband cop, he trains people on taser use.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
You can't tell me that's an accident. It's absurd. And the media runs with that language.
They think we're stupid.
They do. And it is liberal media bullshit. And it's all to soften and to make it sound like, oh, well, it's like doing PR for cops. That's what we're doing here. And whenever we use that kind of language, we are doing PR for cops. And the media.
There was a great story about this the other day. And I can't remember if I find the site, we'll post it in our comments. But it was a great story about how for years and years, news organizations, whenever they report on crime and police matters, they just grab the police reports and they use the police reports to do the reporting. And now all these news organizations are going, hey, wait a minute, we've been doing this for years, but cops actually lie all the time, and they actually never tell the truth, which is
George Floyd died of medical distress. Don't you know?
Right. That if not for obviously citizen participation, then that never would have happened. What are some groups though that have been standing up for Black lives and standing up against police and I want to, one of the things that I want to say while you're finding that is,
you knew I had a list ready to go.
Is that all of the instances where protesters have been accused of doing anything serious in terms of property damage or anything serious in terms of hurting people have almost always turned out to actually be white supremacist plants and provocateurs that have been doing those things. But on the other side, who should we be looking at and who should we be supporting in the city who are doing good work?
So I'm first going to give a big plug to Toussaint Morrison. He's an actor I've actually just known on a personal level because we work in film together for years. But in the last year, he has become one of our main activists. And he has for many years run something called On-Site Public Media. He shoots his own videos. Some of them are funny. Most of them are serious. But he's able to really explain the climate of what's happening in Minneapolis on the ground. He's an incredible speaker and has been a leader in the community as well. Another person to watch is Georgia Fort. She's a producer and media correspondent. She does a lot of local on the ground, like anytime a local news story, she runs out and goes. And I was watching her a lot through the trial as well. Obviously Unicorn Riot, which I think everybody already kind of knows about right now. And they were doing amazing work. And they actually got kettled in a couple weeks ago, which was crazy.
What happened?
So in Brooklyn Center, so our lovely governor, who decided that he knew that there was going to be a lot of uprisings after Daunte Wright was murdered. And so they created something called Operation Safety Net. It basically is not safety. They're claiming it's because of, we're here to protect your First Amendment rights, and this is to keep the community safe and all this nonsense. What it's actually done is given cops another excuse, not like they needed one, but an excuse to actually brutalize protesters. So, you know how these curfews around the country were basically just a reason for cops to become more brutal. Well, that's basically what happened with this. So one night, I think it was the third night of the protests in Brooklyn Center, protesters were getting, shot at with the tear gas and the rubber bullets, and several were injured and took refuge in a local church. I don't know if you saw the photo. It was everywhere on social media the next day, at least in our area, but the cops surrounded this church because the church wouldn't let them in. The church basically, they don't want to be involved. They're a church, and they offer refuge to anyone who needs it. That's the point of a church, right? And so they were giving,
hope, yeah.
Yeah, and the church actually did the right thing here. So I want to give them props. They sheltered the protesters and said the cops couldn't come in without a warrant. So the cops surrounded the church and basically barricaded these protesters inside, who were injured, by the way. Meanwhile, they're arresting media, they're arresting medics, brutalizing medics. It's absolutely disgraceful. And when you wipe out the media at a protest, the only narrative you're going to get is the cop story, which is, of course, what they want, because they want to run with their nonsense report that they were being attacked by soup cans. And
they are acting with complete impunity often, and are illegally doing things because they know that the legal system cannot possibly keep up with the amount of illegal acts that they perform, and that you're not going to get a lot of plaintiffs because a lot of people who they are brutalizing are living precarious lives and can't sustain lawsuits and go through those processes, or even going through a complaint process is arduous, and they know that. And so what I want to say about that is that good job to Keith Ellison, good job to the AG for prosecution, but I'm calling on the AG to do something about these out of control cops. And I was about to say rogue cops, but it's not the rogue cops, it's the cops. It's all of them.
It's all of them.
And
they were trained to do this.
And what they're doing is, I always say cops look for the ways in which they are political, look for the ways in which they're taking a side. And in this instance, what they're doing is this, this massive intimidation and massive prosecution, or massive arrests and massive brutalization of protest and protesters, as a way of making protests de facto illegal when it is not illegal, and just, beating them all and letting the system sort it out, knowing that the system is not going to sort it out. And so I'm calling on the AG to do something about that, even if it's just, to use the bully pulpit and just to push for that, because no one else in your government, seems to be doing a lot about that, and it's so obvious. It's just incredibly obvious that that's what's happening, and that makes me as angry as any of this, because that is involvement in the political process. That is this. This is the cops making a political statement by brutalizing protesters and
choosing which protesters to brutalize
and taking sides. Exactly.
Because I want to say I'm consistent. I am for the First Amendment across the board. When those stupid people were doing those stupid mask protests and my freedom and all that, and they were having their anti-mask protests at the governor's mansion, I actually put a post out there and said, I respect their right to protest. I think what they're protesting is extremely stupid, and they should just go home and maybe complain on Facebook. But I respect their right to protest. They were never brutalized. They were not attacked at the governor's mansion at all. They were allowed to stand there all day breathing COVID all over people, and that was totally fine. But when a Black Lives Matter protest comes in, then all of a sudden the cops do pick a side. And I'm not saying I want those anti-mask protesters to be brutalized. I don't. I want everyone to be treated that same way. I want everyone to be treated the way a Republican white male is treated by the cops. That's what I want. Mm-hmm. I think that's and we see it. Like, I mean, they seem to be able to arrest people like Dylan Roof. They seem to be able to arrest people and give them their day in court when they're literally shooting up buildings.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Absolutely, all of that, which again puts the Dante Wright murder into light as well, because that there is only one reason why that murder happened,
yeah.
and everyone knows that. I hijacked you talking about good organizations, though, so if we want to circle back to that, I think that's actually my favorite part of the segment, is when we get to talk about the good things that people are doing.
Absolutely. No, and there's so much good. And that's really what I want to emphasize, because I think, especially with as Minnesota's concerned, people have seen a lot of the brutality. They kind of have seen that side of the story. But what people haven't seen is the incredible art that has come out of our city. Art is healing. And we've had, so Amelia Brown, she's the founder of Emergency Arts. And so they help like coach and help people like kind of transform their trauma and crisis through their creativity. So that's what that company does. And then there's also this other organization. There's actually a couple. Let me find it. Save the Boards. And so what this is all about is trying to actually preserve all the art that's come out of the uprisings, because I mean, downtown was pretty much boarded up all summer after George Floyd was murdered.
People did art on the boards.
Art on the boards, and not just like small things, like huge, gorgeous murals, and a lot of really incredible activist art. So it wasn't even a lot of it is about George Floyd, but a lot of it was just kind of in general, like just peace and justice and incredible healing that came through that. And so I really am happy that my city has found a way to use art to heal. And even the local theaters have gotten involved. I know obviously we can't commune like we normally do in a theater and watch a play, but several of the local theaters have put on these like small performances that they do online, and they'll just send you an email and be like, click here and watch this link. And almost every single performance I've watched was a Black artist, and it was either them telling a personal story or just Black stories in general, whether they were modern, whether they were older, whether it was a compilation, whether it was sung. And I just want to say, like, through any kind of horrid event in human existence, there are always artists there to try to make something beautiful out of it. And I don't mean beautiful like, I mean, maybe beautiful is the wrong word, but there is something healing about art. And I think it's important that we talk about that too, because I feel like all we ever see is the violence. And people think Minnesota's like a war zone right now. It's not a war zone. My community has never been closer. I have never felt more comfortable talking to my neighbors than I do now. And it's because we've been in the streets together. We've wandered around there. I mean, a few years ago, I used to always have a rule, like never go to a protest alone. And now, like, I really am not worried about going alone, because I know I'm going to bump into people I know. You don't feel alone anymore.
I have been trying to get up some pictures of that, and I'll keep trying. I failed miserably to everyone is worse off for what I just did. But what that just seems to me to be this amazing example of sort of the convergence of activism and sort of persistence and resilience and all of that, and pushing back, but pushing back in kind of the most loving way and the most kind of energy generating way possible.
Yeah. And I think that's the answer, not necessarily for everything. Obviously, we need other organizations that are going to do legislative differences, and we need people who are staying in the streets, and we need people who are comforting families. So we have other great organizations. We have Minnesota Justice Coalition, which is civil rights action through the legislative process. And that's a really important organization we have right now. We also have Racial Justice Network, Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence, Communities Against Police Brutality, CAIR Minnesota, which is our Muslim civil rights activist group. And then we also have Cop Watch. We have Minnesota Immigrants' Rights Action Committee, Native Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. I mean, all these groups come together for these protests. So it's not just one group, and DSA, of course. But it's just like all these groups are coming together because it's not just about the one person. Like, Yes, it's great that Chauvin got convicted. That's wonderful. He's one cop in this entire racist system. And all the cops, they did something weird that they never normally do. They all kind of threw him out to dry, right? They all were sitting there testifying against him. I mean, our police chief, Chief Arredondo, testified against him, which never happens in these police cases, which is great. But
I'm subscribing to the most cynical view of that, which is that cops are so invested in maintaining their status quo that they are willing to sacrifice other cops.
That's exactly it.
In order to do it. So here's an example of some of this art that you're talking about, and this is just, I mean, this is just really amazing.
Yeah. And it's like that all over the city. I mean, and it's like anywhere you go in South Minneapolis, especially close to George Floyd Square, which I do want to say real quick, George Floyd Square, it's on the corner of 38th and Chicago, but it's become like a community gathering place. And the city keeps trying to take it back. So there's been barricades and people kind of there keeping watch since May 25th of last year when George Floyd was murdered. It is, I think, the longest running autonomous zone in U.S. history. I'm not sure on that. Someone can totally fact check me, but I tried to look it up and I didn't see anything remotely close to as long as how long Minneapolis has held this space. It's not a big space, but we have a monument erected. There's art all over. There's people keep candles and flowers. People meet there before going for a march. I mean, it has become a space for the community. And so right now in our local politics, that's becoming like a kind of a huge point of contention, because obviously our cities, well, some people in the city really want it back. And the people who mostly are saying, you know, oh, well, we need the street to be able to drive through and all this. The people complaining do not live in that area. I want to just say that full stop. The people who live there don't care about moving one block when they're driving. They don't care. That space is sacred. And
businesses aren't, you know, necessarily reacting the way that the right is representing them or trying to represent their interests either, in terms of the dynamic of these uprisings and organized protests.
They're not like, I mean, I'm sure they would like, you know, there would still be walkable space. I mean, people can still get to their business. The businesses downtown, I mean, some have left, and I don't want to like misrepresent anything. But the majority of the businesses have been putting Black Lives Matter signs on their doors and support what's happening. They understand why it's happening. They understand what the uprising is about, and they're picking the right side. And of course, like, you know, people want to say, oh, the businesses, and oh, we're losing this. People are actually investing more in small businesses. I mean, especially during the pandemic, I know I've tried to avoid Amazon. I've been trying to only go through mom and pop shops, which sometimes do cost a little bit more, but it's worth it. I'd rather know my money's helping some kid go to dance class than going to Bezos. Like, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, George Floyd Square, and so I just want to mention like why it's so important. They're not even just doing, it's not even protests about police brutality all the time. They had an Earth Day event. They had a May Day event. Like, that's just, it's a community space now. And so what's happening in our local elections, because Minnesota does our election, or Minneapolis, sorry, we do our elections in the off year. So we're actually voting for a new mayor and new city council this year, which, yeah, which is very interesting. And we have a lot of interest. We actually had over 10,000 people sign up to caucus. We're a caucus state. And that's like thousands more than normally participate. So this is a big year.
Municipal politics, even in a big urban, you know, area, that's still quite a lot of people signing up to caucus.
It's amazing. I'm very, very excited about that. We recently did a mayor forum. We had 6 candidates speaking. So if you are interested in that, I would recommend going to the Minneapolis DFL website. I was one of the people hosting that event. And we spoke to all 6 candidates about a variety of topics. I'm not going to speak on who I personally supported.
I was just going to ask you, damn it.
There's two I really like. I will say that. I am the vice chair for Minneapolis DFL, so I don't really want to publicly state anything about, just in case the other one gets the endorsement. And honestly, there are two that I really, really like. There's a couple others that, they got some good stuff going, but I don't really know how they'd be as far as like the full encompassing job of mayor.
Do you feel like the Overton window has opened up, though, and that there is more progressivism in the race, and a better set of people you could live with, as opposed to, or in contrast to previous elections?
Everyone's further left than our current mayor. So that, well, one of them I'm not really quite sure. Actually, his answers were a little tough to read, but I still think I probably would trust him more than our current mayor.
But if you're not reading the room, and if you're not reading the city and the winds of the political winds, then you're not gonna win anyway.
No, and I want to actually mention our current mayor, because he said something. So we remember when Nancy Pelosi made that like horrific statement about
George Floyd died for your sins, basically.
George Floyd sat her on. It was thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice. That nonsense that came out of first of all, why did she talk? It's so easy to just not say anything. No one was looking for a statement from Nancy Pelosi on this. No one cared about her specific opinion on it. No one asked her. She actually thought it was a good idea to get up there and say that, and no one in her team stopped her. No one in her team was like, hey girl, maybe don't do that. Like,
every time something like this happens, I always go, whose job was it to make sure that didn't happen? And whoever that is, they messed up.
Like total. I mean, so that was honestly just awful. But what makes it worse is our own mayor said something very similar. So not only is he far younger than Nancy Pelosi, and he actually is the mayor of our city. He's supposed to represent us. His direct quote, I feel like this is important. George Floyd came to Minneapolis to better his life, but ultimately his death will better our city. That's what our mayor said.
Fuck him. Just throw a can of tuna and shove it up his head. Fuck off. I cannot believe that Antifa has been holding her powder dry for a while now, but I've got several cans of soup that I want to throw at this argument. And you said earlier you were a masochist, not a sadist, but when you looked but there was so much sadism involved in this, because when you see Chauvin do that for 9 minutes, he might as well have been the Marquis de Sade. He was he was nothing but a sadist, and he enjoyed.
You could tell
doing that.
He did.
You could,
and it was disgusting.
Nobody
and
could
horrifying.
look at that and look at his face during that and not know that there was massive serotonin, massive testosterone,
just like pumping through him,
like massive shit pumping through him in that, and so to sort of solemnize that, right? To kind of turn it into this redemptive teleology, forgive the philosophical terms, to turn that into this sort of divine purpose. That to me is what is so, just I'm going to edit that out. It completely, it misses the boat. It absolutely misses the boat. That's the least bad thing you could say about it. And I'm sure that this caused a lot of political fallout for the mayor.
Oh, totally. It's no secret I'm not a big fan of the mayor. I once again, because I'm impartial, right? I'm impartial during this process, but I do want to at least bring up our city is not happy with him. What I am worried about, though, because we are doing ranked choice voting for this endorsement, I'm worried that the two candidates that I really like are going to split a vote and we're going to end up with him again. And that's something I do worry about. I very sincerely hope one of them drops and supports the other. And I do feel like that would actually make a huge difference. But obviously I know that that's probably not going to happen. People who get involved in politics do it for a reason, and they do feel like they have a unique voice. And I don't want to tell someone to drop out, but It's just a worry I have because I'm a pessimist in this current climate. And we need to get rid of our current mayor. We just do. He is not reading the room. He's kind of like a Pete Buttigieg type. Like he reminds me of like that, like neoliberal, like he says all the right things, but in that way where you're like, is that the right thing to say? Is that really how you feel? Like he just reminds me of that kind of smarmy, like he's too much of a politician and you can see his ambition from a mile away. And I would like a new mayor, and I do think that our city deserves one. Our city council also, though, they initially did vote to defund the police and then backtracked pretty quickly.
Yeah, what's up with that?
They really we didn't have enough of them in there that really were going to fight for it. We do have a couple in there that are fighting for it. And I do want to say that we do have a couple current city council members that I really want to keep. But there's a few that I would really like replaced. And we've been doing those. And there's actually been more interest in that than normal too this year. We have a lot of people running, especially in a couple specific districts. There's several people running for these seats. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully we're able to make a dent in that. And the reason I want to say it's systemic is because I actually want to share a quick story about one of the cops. So we've been talking a lot about Derek Chauvin, obviously, because he's and Kimberly Porter. But there were 3 other cops there when George Floyd was murdered. And I'm really worried that now that Chauvin was convicted, people are like not really thinking about those other 3 cops who in my opinion are just as guilty. They might not have had the knee on the neck, but 2 of the other cops still had their knee on his back and his leg. It's not like they were like gone. And the one that wasn't on George Floyd at all, Tao Thao, I want to just share a quick personal story because I was mugged a few years ago in Minneapolis and I called the cops because I am a blue-eyed white woman and I've always been told that the cops are there to help me. Sure. And so I called the cops. That was actually, I think, the only time in my life I've called the cops. And they came very quickly. Tao Thao was actually the cop that came to help me. He was so nice to me. So nice, of course, which is what I've come to expect as a blue-eyed white woman. And this cop helped me out. He took my statement. He actually went and even found my bag. I lost the money, of course, that was in there. But the guy who burgled me, by the way, he didn't even take my euro. I had a $50 like euro in there. And I'm like, that's like worth way more. Like I would have taken that. But, not.
If only we had more cosmopolitan muggers.
Right. But he like, so I get mugged. He gets I just, gave my bag up immediately. I'm not trying to fight over anything in there. And they didn't end up catching the guy, but I got my stuff back. So that's how I remembered my one instance with my interaction with a Minneapolis PD. And then we flash forward, and like many people, I watched the video of George Floyd being murdered, and I went, hold on, I know that guy. Mm-hmm. Why did he treat my life as important, but not this other person's life? And why is he treating the people? I don't want to necessarily even talk so much about George in this instance because he wasn't one of the cops on top of George, but the way he was interacting with the people who were onlooking.
No, that's a very big part of the picture. That's a very important part of what happened.
It is. And so the way he was treating them and the onlookers and the violence and the anger in his eye, he treated them completely differently than the way he treated me. And that's why I know that there's no such thing as a good cop. And that's actually what ruined my even thinking, okay, well, some people are good cops, but, they're not all bad. No, they are, because at the end of the day, they are all there to uphold the same system. They are all there to protect each other. That blue wall of silence is real, and they don't care.
And only gets broken when they have to sacrifice someone in order to be able to continue their regular balance of power, right? That's a calculation. That's a calculated decision. And I think it's so important when you think about the entire scenario, just as we talked about earlier about the sort of militant love that the people surrounding the scene were showing in trying to stop what was happening. It's also important to understand what the cops were doing, including your friend, what they were doing in terms of keeping people back, in terms of crowd control. That dynamic, let us do our job, our job is to kill this guy. You need to let us do that. I mean, that's, that to me, that augments that sense of the political of what's going on and the way in which, the different roles that different people were playing during that time. I think that whole scene and that whole 9 minutes and what preceded it is a scene in American life that is going to be, that we will never forget, and hopefully will be, uh, a fire that lights in people. But you have to understand that whole scene, what the people were doing, what Chauvin was doing, what the cops who were directly assisting by holding George Floyd's body down were doing, and then also what the cops were doing by basically trying to control that crowd. It's all part of the same mosaic.
It was,
Well,
and they were all on the same page.
Yeah, and I just want to say that I said his name, Tuofao. I can't remember. I probably pronounced his name wrong. The officer, he was very casually mocking George Floyd while this was happening. He's like, "See, kids, this is what happens when you do drugs," and I mean, like being a jackass to the crowd, and then also he directly intervening when it came to the firefighter that wanted to help. It's like, if you really were a firefighter, you would just let us do our job and murder this guy. And so yeah, here's this nice guy that you thought was a nice guy, and then suddenly your skin tone changes. And
yeah, that's you're cutting out, but no, you're completely right. Like that's exactly the difference. Like the skin tone changed, and therefore so did his reaction to the people. And I mean, I don't want to say like necessarily had I personally been there that day, he would have been nicer to me, because a firefighter was also a white woman. So I think it also is situational.
Yeah, it's all about the context.
It's all about context too.
At that time.
But they were protecting the thin blue line at that time. Whereas in my situation, he was protecting me.
And their image, we will help you out. You are the image of the type of person that we
I was blonde then too, so
I was gonna ask, because like, slightly less deviant looking than, because you look really threatening right now.
Super threatening. I'm 5'2". I'm terrifying. I know. Yeah. I mean, and I've even had bad.
Fuck around. Yeah.
And I've even had bad experiences with cops. I got pulled over. Mm-hmm. I've been pulled over several times. One time right in front of my own apartment late at night because I had a taillight out, and I was like, I didn't even know. I was just coming back from work. I was crabby. I was pretty rude to the cop, honestly. It was pretty close after, not this year, it was a couple of years ago, it was another murder. And so I looked at this cop and I'm like, look, I live right there. I'm just trying to go home. I don't care about my headlight. You're not writing me a ticket. I'm going home. Apparently you're not supposed to walk away from cops. But I did.
But that in itself is telling.
I didn't get shot.
You were able to do that. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, he did end up calling other cops. He called backup. I'm 5'2". He called backup. There ended up being 4 cops there. One of them, an older cop who just told me, he's like, "You're a brat." He's like, "Stop being such a little brat." And I'm like, wow, you're infantilizing me. I'm a 30-year-old woman. Like, and that's what cops do, because I'm a white female. Therefore, I'm young and need to be protected. Yeah. Whereas a black woman who's 16 years old gets murdered by the police because, and they're calling her, a woman.
Threat. Yeah,
she's
that's
a threat.
And that's a woman, and that, yeah, exactly. So all of this is that, Minneapolis has become this sort of picture of the American struggle against police violence, and also the sort of beacon of hope, and also the sort of example of some of the worst police, and all of these things are going on. But one thing that you've been talking about today is just the kind of beauty and energy and positive political energy and positive community energy that's been coming out of this. And that's what I hope that people will really keep in mind and remember and focus on as they think about all of this.
I do too. I want Minnesota to be synonymous, not only, I want us to be remembered for moving this movement forward. I don't want people to just think of Minneapolis as like, oh, that was awful, and then move on. I want us to actually not just be the place that something awful happened, but I want us to be the beginning of the change of policing in the entire country. I want Minnesota to be at the forefront of it. I want us to change. I want us to defund and abolish the system we have currently, and we need to just completely redo it. And hopefully once we figure out a new system for public safety, the rest of the country follows suit. Because at the end of the day, police are supposed to serve and protect the communities. That's what they're there for. However, police are actually, in what we see, a militarized domestic force that are there to protect property, serve the interests of the state, and then uphold the traditions of entrenched white supremacy. So they aren't doing the job that they're supposed to do. And I think part of the reason is because cops in Minnesota, at least, don't have to live in the city that they police. I know in some places around the country, there is actually rules put in place, and those rules need to exist because only 7% of Minneapolis cops live in Minneapolis. 7%. That's like less than 100 of our cops. So why would we think those people are there to serve and protect our community? They're not. They're there to serve and protect the community they live in from us. That's what they're doing.
By disciplining, by being this, to me, being a political force. And
yes,
the fact that they take the sides that they do, and the fact that they take the positions that they do, and the fact that if you ever want to argue with someone about the whole good cop, bad cop, or the whole thing about what reform is possible without radically defunding and radically restructuring everything, just ask, name one limitation on the use of force, name one limitation on police behavior that anyone speaking for the police does support. Name one limit that the unions do support. Name one limit. And people would be like, well, Chauvin was found guilty, obviously. And it's like, no, I'm not talking about after the fact. I'm talking about name a prior restraint that any police organization or police spokesperson supports for the police. You never can, which the reductio ad absurdum of this is, in the end, they want a world where there are no limits whatsoever. And if we can occasionally prosecute a few of the worst examples, then they think they win. They think they can win that way. And to be honest with you, I think that too many people, including on our side politically, are sleeping on this because of the guilty verdict.
They are. And I mean, that was kind of the worry. That seeing one cop held accountable is somehow justice and somehow fixes. We didn't solve systemic racism in one verdict. That's absolutely absurd. We shouldn't even be happy about this verdict. This is what should be the norm. Holding cops accountable for murder should be the norm. This should not be, oh my gosh, I can't believe it finally happened. Like, yes, I'm happy, but like, we need real change. We need actual legislative change. We need to get rid of qualified immunity for starters. I mean, bare minimum. And do you know that in Minnesota, they actually tried to pass something where cops couldn't be affiliated with white supremacy groups? It was shot down because we have a Republican-led Senate. So while we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic House, we have a Republican
You have a terrible Senate. You have some terrible people in your state.
We still have slavery.
Rivaled
illegal.
Rivaled only by the complete lunkheads that run our legislature.
Oh, I'm sure. Like, okay, so slavery still legal in Minnesota, obviously illegal nationally, but they can't get it removed from our state charter and state constitution because of our Republican Senate. This should be a bipartisan no-brainer. Oh, also, conversion therapy, it's illegal in pretty much every state. Minnesota's still holding on. I mean, they haven't been practicing it, but it's still legal. We can't get rid of it because of our republic. It's sickening.
I just think of some Republican in Minnesota going, oh, well, it's, everybody deserves a chance,
That's probably it. I just hear them more like, oh, we're going to own the libs and just not do it anyway.
That too. No, I mean, it's such a study in contrasts. And all of that said, it's incredibly inspiring to see all of the good that has come out of this adversity. That is not a celebration of the cause of that adversity. That is the fact that there's good people doing good work in spite of the shit that they have to deal with every single day. And if that, if that pushes people to do things, then I guess we'll take it.
Yeah.
But it really is inspiring. Those are the heroes,
Yes.
the real heroes that are coming out of that. And I really appreciate the fact that you had this really good list of some of the best individuals and organizations doing that work. And obviously there are countless others.
Yes.
And so we're just going to have you keep coming back to tell us more about what's going on there in the cities.
Yeah, I would love to. And I'm really, thank you for letting me talk about this. I have had so much to say for a while. And I really do want to just stress how our community came together, and people do keep showing up. And that's something that a lot of the activists keep repeating at rallies, like, keep showing up, keep showing up, keep showing up. And they're right. We just need to keep showing up, because eventually more and more people are going to join. And eventually we won't be silenced anymore. We will be heard. We are going to make change. And as awful as this last year has been, I do have that little bit of hope. It's like, I don't want to get all Greek mythology on you with, like, a little hope with her wings at the bottom of the box and everything. But there is that hope still there that we're going to be able to create a better future out of this. And I still have that hope. And I hope that I've just said hope too many times.
That's okay. And you have joy on it too. Like, you're happy to see that even in the midst of everything else. And so I can't thank you enough. It's always great to find any reason to have you come back on the live stream and the podcast. And we just are very appreciative of it. So Briana Rose Lee, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please support us if you like what we do and want to help us keep making it available to everyone for free. Please support us at patreon.com/solidarityhouse. And you can also get some free kind of premium content and that kind of stuff. But really, you're doing it because you believe in what we're doing, and you know that there's no place like us here in the Rocky Mountain region. And so we love you all. Thanks again, Briana. Thanks, Auntie Fa. And we'll catch you on the flip side.
I always have a can of tuna for you.